Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
Several people are dead or were killed as Myanmar security forces fired on pro-democracy protesters after the junta hit half a dozen detained journalists, including an Associated Press photographer, with criminal charges.
Texas governor lifts a mask mandate and opens the state 100%.
President Joe Biden said Tuesday the United States would have enough vaccine for its entire adult population by the end of May, as he announced a deal for pharma giant Merck to produce the shot developed by rival Johnson & Johnson.
We'll work together to expand the
And UNICEF has installed 168 empty desks outside UN headquarters in New York City. Each represents 1 million children whose schools have been entirely closed for almost a year due to COVID-19 lockdowns.
First, to the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. Several people are dead or were killed as Myanmar security forces fired on pro-democracy protesters today. That is after the junta hit half a dozen detained journalists, including an Associated Press photographer, with criminal charges. International pressure is mounting. Western powers have repeatedly hit the generals with sanctions. And Britain has already called for a United Nations Security Council meeting on Friday. But the junta has ignored the global condemnation, responding to the uprising with escalating force, and security forces used lethal force on demonstrators again on Wednesday. 4 people were shot dead during a protest in a city in central Myanmar. According to medics who spoke to AFP by phone, another 2 demonstrators died about 2 hours' drive away in Mandalay, the nation's second biggest city, according to medics. And one of the victims in Mandalay was also shot in the head and the other in the chest, according to a doctor who asked not to be named. Meanwhile, AP photographer Tain Zhao, 32 years old, was arrested on Saturday as he covered a demonstration in Myanmar's commercial hub, Yangon, his lawyer told AFP on Wednesday. Tain Zhao and 5 other Myanmar journalists had been charged under a law against causing fear, spreading false news, or agitating directly or indirectly a government employee, according to the lawyer Tin Zar U. Now, the junta amended the law last month to increase the maximum sentence from 2 years to 3 years in jail. The other 5 journalists are from Myanmar Now, Myanmar Photo Agency, 7-Day News, Zizwet Online News, and a freelancer, according to Associated Press. AP's Vice President of International News, Ian Phillips, called for Tain Zhao's immediate release.
In a related news, Wednesday's violence came after the foreign ministers of Southeast Asian nations, including Myanmar's junta representative Wuna Maung Luin, discussed the crisis at a virtual meeting. After the talks, Indonesia's Retno Marsudi expressed frustration over the junta's lack of cooperation. Listen to this.
Oleh karena itu, Indonesia mendesak Security Forces Myanmar untuk menahan diri dan tidak menggunakan kekuatan dan kekerasan. ASEAN bertemu untuk membahas dan mencari penyelesaian. Namun demikian, it takes two to tango. Keinginan dan niat baik ASEAN untuk membantu tidak akan dapat dijalankan jika Myanmar tidak membuka pintu bagi ASEAN. Respecting the principle of non-interference is a must, and I'm sure that no single ASEAN country has intention to violate this principle. But at the same time, upholding and implementing values of democracy, respect of human rights, good governance, rule of law, and constitutional government are equally important.
Singapore, which is Myanmar's largest investor, condemned the authorities' use of lethal force, with Premier Lee Hsien Loong telling the BBC that it was unacceptable. Philippine Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin said the first step should be the immediate release of Suu Kyi. He said the hurt of the small finger is felt by the whole body. Myanmar is not a small finger, but a big part of the two hands that together make up the family of ASEAN 10. Observers are skeptical about what difference the bloc can make, pointing to its policies of non-interference and making decisions based on consensus.
Now, the Myanmarese junta will not bow to pressure from some of its neighbors, according to an analyst, soon after a recent Association of Southeast Asian Nations virtual meeting that saw some governments criticize the military junta over the nation's rising unrest. The country has faced heavy criticism over the military coup and a brutal crackdown by its security forces as several pro-democracy protesters were killed on Wednesday. Let's listen in.
I think most ASEAN countries, as well as Myanmar itself, will be adopting a wait-and-see attitude. Namely, the Myanmarese junta, I think for the moment, would not accede to the demands of some of these more vocal ASEAN countries. They are going to wait and see whether, for example, the sanctions are going to be imposed on the country by the greater economic powers. And if that is not forthcoming, I think the junta would likely continue with the rule for some time to come. It was not so long ago, I think the international community was condemning Aung San Suu Kyi for not taking action to protect the Rohingya people and so on. But, well, weeks later, the same international community, at least some of them, are calling for Aung San Suu Kyi to be restored to power and so on. So that highlights the difficulties sometimes in tackling some of these domestic developments in many of these transitioning democracies. It's very often you will see ASEAN countries sort of very carefully nudging each other, but not really interfering with each other's domestic affairs, even if the developments of those domestic affairs may be a little bit negative, or in this case, very negative.
The junta has ignored the global condemnation responding to the uprising with escalating force, and security forces used lethal force on demonstrators again today, as we saw earlier. Today's violence came after the foreign ministers of Southeast Asian nations, including Myanmar's junta representative Wuna Maung Lwin, discussed the crisis at this virtual meeting. After the talks, Indonesia's Retno Marsudi expressed frustration over the junta's lack of cooperation, and again Singapore condemned the use of lethal force.
Staying in Myanmar, security forces are seen dragging limp protesters in a street covered with blood in Myanmar's city of Moniwa. Take a look. The crackdown has continued in recent days, with at least 35 killed by security forces, including 9 today. There were also chaotic scenes at North Okalapa. A civil society health clinic confirmed 19 injured people had arrived for medical treatment. An official told AFP, quote, "Some got hit with rubber bullets, some fell down, and some were beaten. We had to transfer one man to hospital for an operation because a rubber bullet hit his head. We do not have a surgeon here." A protest in the central city of Mingyan also turned deadly as security forces confronted protesters. They fired tear gas, rubber bullets, and live rounds. A volunteer medic on the scene told AFP, adding that at least 10 people were injured. In Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city, one protester was shot in the head through his motorcycle helmet. U Si Thu, a doctor and protester, told the New York Times that the man Mong U had been fleeing the police and soldiers who had been trying to prevent protesters from gathering. The doctor said 2 other protesters were wounded.
Meanwhile, Myanmar's military junta and the envoy sent by its toppled civilian government have launched contradictory claims over who represents the country at the United Nations, according to officials. Ambassador Kyaw Moe Tun spectacularly broke with the junta before the General Assembly on Friday in an emotional plea for help to restore ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, the next day, the junta said the envoy had been sacked. But on Monday, Kyaw Moe Tun sent a letter to the President of the UN General Assembly to say that he still holds the post. Now, on Tuesday, Myanmar's foreign ministry sent a note verbal to the UN, also obtained by AFP, claiming that Kyaw Moe Tun had been removed. Now, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric told a press briefing that the body had received the 2 contradictory letters. He said, "We are taking a look at those letters, where they came from, and what we will do."
To Netherlands now, where police said an explosion occurred Wednesday near a COVID-19 testing center, shattering windows but causing no apparent injuries. A bomb squad was sent to determine whether any explosive material remained at the scene, public television network NOS reported. In January, a COVID testing center was set on fire in the Dutch village of Urk as protests broke out over the start of an overnight curfew in the Netherlands, introduced as part of measures intended to rein in the virus. The Netherlands suffered several nights of rioting, the most violent the country has seen in decades. A court last week ordered the government to immediately lift the nationwide curfew, ruling that the government had wrongly used emergency powers to bring it into force.
Now, Britons have received their first coronavirus vaccine dose. To tell us more about this, here's Graham Thomas joining us live from the United Kingdom. Hello, Graham.
Good afternoon, good evening. Alma, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for asking.
Not too bad, thank you. You're right. Britain announced on Sunday that it has given more than 20 million people at least 1 dose of the coronavirus vaccine, with the rapid rollout providing hope in a country with Europe's highest death toll. Prime Minister Boris Johnson called it a huge national achievement, while praising National Health Service staff and others involved for their tireless work. But dampening the good news was the detection of a coronavirus strain that's emerged in Brazil, which is feared to be more contagious and more resistant to vaccines. The variant that emerged in Manaus, northern Brazil, has been detected in 6 people here in the United Kingdom, one of whom cannot be located due to incomplete contact information after taking a coronavirus test. In mid-February, the UK met a government target of 15 million people of the most vulnerable receiving their first doses. The government says it plans to offer a first jab to the whole adult population by the end of July, with only Israel and the United Arab Emirates having vaccinated more people per head of the population so far. The UK's vaccination programme has rolled out fast since it starts in early December, when it became the first country in the whole world to begin mass inoculation with a fully trialled vaccine. Earlier, failures in contact tracing and controlling the spread of infection saw cases soar in the UK, and the country's death toll of just over 122,000 is the highest in Europe. The country is still under national lockdown, but daily cases, hospitalizations and deaths have all fallen dramatically since late January, despite the emergence of more infectious variants in the country. There were 6,035 new daily cases reported Sunday and 144 deaths, the lowest figures since early autumn. On Thursday, Britain lowered the country's virus alert level down 1 notch from the highest possible, saying the fall in cases had reduced the threat to a state-run national health service. Back to you, Alma.
20 million got the dose. What percentage of the United Kingdom has been vaccinated then? And if you get vaccinated, can one choose which COVID vaccine one can get in the UK?
Well, government data shows of the 20.5 million jabs given in the UK up to the 26th of February, 19.6 million of those were first doses, and about 770,000 were second jabs, an increase of nearly 33,000 on figures released the previous day. This means that just over 1.1% of the UK population has been fully vaccinated now with the 2 doses. There's no private option in Britain for us to choose which of the COVID vaccinations we have, as the vaccines are brought, distributed and deployed by the state-funded National Health Service, which serves all, as you know, rich and poor, free at the point of delivery, with no one allowed to jump the queue or pick and choose. Back to you, Alma.
All right, thank you very much. Stay safe, Graham, and looking forward to more updates coming out of the United Kingdom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alma. This is Graham Thomas for EBC here in the United Kingdom. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden said Tuesday the United States would have sufficient vaccine supply by the end of May to inoculate the U.S. adult population. Listen to this.
We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. When we came into office, the prior administration had contracted for not nearly enough vaccine to cover adults in America. We rectified that. About 3 weeks ago, we were able to say that we'll have enough vaccine supply for adults by the end of July. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May.
Biden made the announcement during a short speech in which he confirmed a deal for pharma giant Merck to produce rival Johnson & Johnson's single-dose COVID-19 vaccine to boost supply nationwide. Johnson & Johnson has so far said it aims to deliver 100 million doses to the United States by June.
And as mentioned, President Joe Biden also said that the United States would have enough vaccine for its entire adult population by the end of May, as he announced that a deal for pharma giant Merck to produce the shot developed by rival Johnson & Johnson. Again, let's listen in.
We're announcing a major step forward. 2 of the largest healthcare and pharmaceutical companies in the world that are usually competitors are working together on the vaccine. Johnson & Johnson and Merck will work together to expand the production of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. This is the type of collaboration between companies we saw in World War II. We also invoked the Defense Production Act to equip 2 Merck facilities to the standards necessary to safely manufacture the J&J vaccine. And with the urging and assistance of my administration, Johnson & Johnson is also taking additional new actions to safely accelerate vaccine production. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine manufacturing facilities will now begin to operate 24/7.
The J&J shot appears slightly less protective than Pfizer and Moderna's regimes, which have an efficacy of around 95% against all forms of COVID-19. But all 3 have been shown to fully protect against hospitalizations and death. A major vaccine producer in its own right, Merck had begun work on coronavirus vaccines, but abandoned those efforts in January, saying the immune responses that were inferior to successful COVID-19 vaccines. The agreement between Merck and J&J follows on the heels of an accord between Pfizer, BioNTech, and French pharma giant Sanofi, which plans to produce 125 million doses at a factory in Frankfurt Germany after Sanofi's own vaccine candidate fell short.
Now, the earlier remarks of President Biden came moments after Texas Governor Greg Abbott lifted a state mask mandate and authorized business to open in the state 100%. Let's listen in.
It's now time to open Texas 100%.
Abbott said for nearly half a year, most businesses have been open either 75% or 50%, and during that time, too many Texans have been sidelined from employment opportunities. Abbott said he was lifting the restrictions because of the arrival of COVID-19 vaccines and better testing and treatments. According to a report from Houston.com, both Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo and Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner jointly signed a letter to Abbott asking him to keep the mask mandate in place. In the Tuesday letter, Hidalgo and Turner said they believe lifting the mandate would be premature and harmful to the progress made in the pandemic thus far. A report from CBS Austin said that Abbott pointed to hospitalizations being a major factor in his decision. On Tuesday, Austin Travis County health leaders announced the region was coming back down to stage 3 after being stage 5 as recently as last month, after hospitalizations have decreased by more than half. In the past week, the governor had hinted at taking actions regarding COVID-19 restrictions. Abbott's move lifting restrictions came despite a warning on Monday by Rochelle Walensky, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Let's listen in.
With these new statistics, I am really worried about reports that more states are rolling back the exact public health measures we have recommended to protect people from COVID-19. I understand the temptation to do this. 70,000 cases a day seems good compared to where we were just a few months ago. But we cannot be resigned to 70,000 cases a day, 2,000 daily deaths. Please hear me clearly. At this level of cases with variants spreading, we stand to completely lose the hard-earned ground we have gained. These variants are a very real threat to our people and our progress. Now is not the time to relax the critical safeguards that we know can stop the spread of COVID-19 in our communities, not when we are so close.
To other news now, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is fighting for his political life after a third woman accused him of sexual harassment. The Democrat has suffered a spectacular fall from grace since he became a national star last year for his handling of the state's coronavirus pandemic. Many commentators had tipped him for a role in President Joe Biden's administration, but now members of his own party are calling for his resignation. Already facing heat over accusations he deliberately underreported COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes, Cuomo referred himself for investigation Monday over sexual misconduct allegations by two former aides. Hours later, Anna Rudge, 33, told the New York Times that she met the now 63-year-old Cuomo at a wedding in September of 2019, and the newspaper published a photo showing the governor holding a visibly uncomfortable Rudge by the cheeks. Democrats and Republicans have joined Cuomo's accusers and anti-harassment campaigners in calling for the three-term governor to quit. Cuomo said Sunday he was truly sorry if his conduct had ever been misinterpreted as an unwanted flirtation. He denied ever inappropriately touching or propositioning to anyone.
How many times do you have to see this?
Now, after a third woman came forward accusing New York Governor Andrew Cuomo of sexual harassment, protesters gathered in front of his office in Manhattan to demand his resignation. Watch this.
Third woman so far came out accusing Governor Cuomo of sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior. We know that where there's three, more, right? That's right. That's right. These things are not isolated incidents.
Make no mistake, an independent investigation must go forward regardless of whether the governor resigns or not. An investigation is needed for accountability. His resignation is needed for New York. This governor has spent a decade abusing his power. These allegations, which are incredibly atrocious, difficult to read, difficult to imagine, are just another reminder of a decade of abusive, combative, and terrible behavior by the governor of the state.
How he's handled the coronavirus epidemic, withholding information about nursing homes, and then these latest allegations. I think it's an embarrassment to our party and to the state for him to continue to be in office. So I'm here, to call on him to resign.
It's definitely, something that impacts every woman, and there should be no tolerance for that kind of behavior, especially someone, who's a governor, someone who has to lead the example, right?
Meanwhile, Australia's Attorney General outed himself as the unnamed cabinet minister accused of raping a 16-year-old girl, denying the decades-old allegation Wednesday and seeking to draw a line under a crisis consuming the country's conservative government. After a speculation-filled week that has roiled Australian politics, 50-year-old Christian Porter, the government's top lawyer, and a former state prosecutor tearfully denied wrongdoing, saying what is being alleged did not happen. Let's listen in.
I was aware over the last few months of a whispering campaign. Had the accusation ever been put to me before they were printed, I would have at least been able to say the only thing that I can say, and likely the only thing that I'm ever going to be able to say, and it's the truth, and that is that nothing in the allegations that have been printed ever happened. It was a long time ago, and I'd always remembered it as a happy time. But I can say categorically that what has been put in various forms, in allegations, simply did not happen. If that happens, anyone in public life is able to be removed simply by the printing of an allegation. Every child we raise can have their lives destroyed by online reporting of accusations alone. My guess is that if I were to resign and that set a new standard, well, there wouldn't be much need for an Attorney General anyway, because there would be no rule of law left to protect in this country.
He stands accused of raping a fellow student in 1988 while they attended a debating competition at the University of Sydney. Porter insisted he would not step down but would take a few short weeks off to deal with the mental strain caused by the allegations while reportedly hiring a top defamation lawyer.
Meanwhile, Russia warned Wednesday it would rebuff aggression after the United States slapped Kremlin-linked officials with sanctions over the poisoning of opposition figure Alexei Navalny. Washington on Tuesday imposed penalties in a coordinated action with the European Union as U.S. intelligence concluded that Moscow orchestrated the near-fatal poisoning of jailed Kremlin critic Navalny in August. Listen.
It's clear that Russian officials targeted Mr. Navalny for his activism and his efforts to reveal uncomfortable truths about Russian officials' corruption and to give voice to Russian citizens' legitimate grievances with their government and its policies. We are exercising our authorities to send a clear signal that Russia's use of chemical weapons and human rights abuses have severe consequences. So when the United States and Europe act in conjunction with one another, when we both take steps to impose these costs, those costs will be noticed in Moscow. And it will also be noticed that the international community is standing up to underscore a norm that chemical weapons cannot ever be used anytime, any place, and by anyone.
Today, the United States is announcing sanctions on 7 senior members of the Russian government, an expansion of sanctions under the Chemical and Biological Weapons Control and Warfare Elimination Act, new export restrictions on items that could be used for biological agent and chemical production, and visa restrictions. And the Department of State, Commerce, and Treasury will also have releases out shortly with further details.
We will continue to systematically and resolutely defend our national interests and rebuff aggression, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, adding Moscow would react on the basis of reciprocity and not necessarily symmetrically. She accused the United States of trying to cultivate the image of an external enemy as a way to distract attention from domestic problems. We urge our colleagues not to play with fire, she added in a statement published late Tuesday. The targeted sanctions announced Tuesday signal a harder line from U.S. President Joe Biden and add to a series of penalties the EU and the United States have imposed on Russia since Moscow annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. Echoing comments made by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov earlier Tuesday, Zakharova said that Russia will respond in turn to the penalties. Navalny was flown to Germany for treatment, but he defiantly returned in January, only to be arrested and then sent to a penal colony after spurring massive rallies through his allegations of corruption by Putin.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Now, the Philippines is scheduled to receive the COVID-19 vaccines from United Kingdom's AstraZeneca on Thursday, according to Malacanang. Now, this is to confirm that the initial shipment of AstraZeneca is set to arrive tomorrow, according to presidential spokesperson Harry Roque in a press statement. The Philippines was supposed to receive on March 1 around 525,600 doses of COVID-19 shots developed by AstraZeneca under Vaccines Global Access or COVAX facility. However, the arrival of AstraZeneca vaccines was delayed due to global supply issues. Senator Christopher Bongo said that around 487,000 doses of UK-manufactured vaccine is expected to arrive at the Villamor Air Base in Pasay City at around 7:30 in the evening on Thursday. Senator Go also said that President Duterte would lead the turnover rights for the AstraZeneca vaccines. The Philippines is set to receive about 44 million doses of vaccines allocated by the COVAX facility within the year. The country is also expected to have access to up to 9.2 million AstraZeneca vaccines. On Sunday, President Duterte led the turnover ceremony for 600,000 doses of Sinovac Biotech's CoronaVac vaccine donated by China to the Philippines. The government's goal is to vaccinate 50 million to 70 million Filipinos by the end of the year.
Staying here in the Philippines, the Pasay City government on Wednesday assured more stringent measures are in place to contain the new South African variant of coronavirus after receiving reports that 3 of its residents have contracted the new strain. Mayor Emmy Calixto Rubiano said the 3 have already recovered from the disease, but contact tracing and tests are not yet over. Rubiano said the patients will still have to undergo a series of tests as part of the city's efforts to control the local transmission of the new variant. Rubiano said the city government has imposed stricter protocols, reminding the residents not to be complacent, especially with the arrival of COVID-19 vaccines. At least 77 barangays have been placed under localized enhanced community quarantine, while one of these barangays is under total lockdown. Rubiano said about 210 houses from these 77 villages are now being monitored. She said 26 new nurses have been deployed to the isolation facilities located at the SM Mall of Asia, Folk Arts Theater, and Pasay Sports Complex. Additional nurses will also be deployed at the Oplan Kalingas isolation centers. Some 180 police personnel have been tasked to enforce stricter community quarantine protocols, while 100 contact tracers augmented the massive contact tracing efforts. Rubiano said the Pasay City is not yet ready to be placed under moderate general community quarantine amid the sudden surge in the city's COVID-19 cases.
In other news, at least 10 rockets slammed into a military base in western Iraq, hosting U.S.-led coalition troops on Wednesday, according to security sources, leaving 1 civilian contractor dead. Now, the attack on the sprawling Ain al-Assad base in Iraq's western desert comes after several weeks of escalating U.S.-Iran tensions on Iraqi soil. Ain al-Assad hosts both Iraqi forces and U.S.-led coalition troops helping fight the Islamic State group, as well as the unmanned drones the coalition uses to surveil jihadist sleeper cells. Coalition spokesman Colonel Wayne Maroto confirmed that 10 rockets hit the base at 7:20 in the morning, while Iraqi security forces said they had found a platform from which 10 Grad-type rockets hit the Ain al-Assad base. Western security forces told AFP the rockets were Iranian-made Arash models, which are 122mm artillery rockets and heavier than those seen in similar attacks. The death marks the 3rd fatality in rocket attacks in recent weeks after rockets targeting U.S.-led troops in the Kurdish regional capital of Arbil left 2 people dead. In response, the U.S. carried out an airstrike on February 26 against Kataib Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed Iraqi paramilitary force stationed along the Iraqi-Syrian border.
The grave of the 4 Filipino missing oil workers kidnapped and executed by the terrorist group ISIS was finally located on March 1st, according to the Philippine Embassy in Libya. The embassy confirmed the location was in a cemetery in the eastern coastal city of Derna. The embassy said on Monday, Libyan military authorities led embassy officials to the Dar Ahmar Islamic Cemetery 10 kilometers from Derna, where they said Donato Santiago, Gregorio Titan, Roldan Blaza, and Wilson Elige were buried after their bodies were discovered or recovered 6 years ago. The volunteer who oversees burials at the Dar Ahmar, as well as members of the Libyan Red Crescent team who retrieved and later buried the remains, are convinced that the bodies they buried there belong to the 6 kidnapped foreign oil workers. The Department of Foreign Affairs has conveyed the latest development to the kin of the 4 Filipino nationals and will make arrangements for forensics experts to assist in identifying the remains and bringing them home. The 4 have been missing since they were abducted along with 2 co-workers from Austria and the Czech Republic by ISIS militants who attacked the Ghani oil field in southern Libya on March 6, 2015. The embassy there and head of mission El Mer Kato said nothing much had been heard from the kidnapped foreign oil workers until 2 years later when a video showing their execution was found in a laptop seized from slain ISIS fighters in Derna. Sometime in 2018, the embassy was informed that the remains of the 4 missing Filipinos could be among those that have been recovered by the Libyan Red Crescent in various parts of Derna and later buried there. However, due to the unstable security situation, the embassy was not able to send a team to Derna to search for the 4 Filipinos. It was only in October 2020 that embassy officials were able to travel to Benghazi and request the assistance of authorities in finding the 4.
A strong 6.3 magnitude earthquake hit central Greece on Wednesday, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, prompting residents in the city of Larissa to rush into the streets, according to local media. The Institute of Geodynamics in Athens said the quake, which could be felt across central and northern Greece, had measured at a magnitude of 6. According to the Athens Observatory, the epicenter of the quake was 21 kilometers south of the town of Elasona, near Larissa. And there were at least 3 aftershocks following the main tremor, including one at magnitude 4, and authorities warned there could be more. The Civil Protection Agency also reported landslides had occurred in the region, and authorities were assessing for further damage. Greece is located on a number of fault lines and is sporadically hit by earthquakes.
We have more updates coming your way. Please don't go away. Meanwhile, world stock markets shot higher on Monday, bouncing back from last week's heavy sell-off as worries about early interest rate hikes faded and U.S. Treasury yields receded. Major U.S. indices surged as investors greeted weekend approval of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in the U.S. and congressional progress on U.S. President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion economic package, which passed the House early Saturday morning. The broad-based S&P 500 jumped 2.4% to 3,901.82, its best session since June, as the yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury note declined somewhat. Higher U.S. Treasury bond yields last week sparked worries about inflation and a sudden shift in Federal Reserve policy. But Sam Stovall, Chief Investment Officer of CFRA Research, observed in a note that even with the recent rise in Treasury yields, interest rates remain anemically low by historic standards. In Europe, London, Frankfurt, and Paris all closed the day 1.6% higher, following a strong session in Asia.
In other business news, British Finance Minister Rishi Sunak unveiled his annual budget Wednesday, promising measures to safeguard businesses and jobs while tackling virus-fueled debt as England prepares to exit its third lockdown. Ahead of the budget statement in Parliament, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative government announced late Tuesday that it would extend its furlough scheme, paying the bulk of wages for millions of private sector workers. News of the multi-billion-pound furlough extension until the end of September, 5 months longer than planned, boosted share prices of retailers and travel companies trading in London. The furlough scheme has contributed to soaring government debt, which Sunak may tackle in part by using his budget to announce a rise in corporation tax or a levy on company profits, according to reports.
Meanwhile, Canada's pandemic-hit economy contracted 5.4% in 2020, its worst plunge on record, despite a strong rebound in the final 3 months of the year, the National Statistical Agency said. In the fourth quarter of last year, the economy beat expectations by growing 9.6% amid higher government spending to help Canadians weather coronavirus restrictions, as well as increased investments in business equipment and housing. In 2019, GDP grew by 1.9%. Many Canadians started working from home at the onset of the pandemic, and public health officials ordered most retailers to close temporarily to slow the spread of COVID-19. As a result, online shopping suddenly became more common. Household spending, however, was down slightly. Canadians in these times of economic uncertainty, for example, opted to buy used cars and trucks instead of new vehicles. A decline in purchases of clothing and footwear was partly offset by increased buys of games, toys and hobbies, as well as equipment for sport, camping and open-air recreation.
Meanwhile, Germany on Wednesday took a step towards forcing companies to take responsibility for any labor or environmental abuses in their global supply chain with a new law that allows for fines worth millions of euros. The law was spurred on by a deadly fire in a textile factory in Pakistan and a devastating dam collapse at a Brazilian iron ore mine that killed more than 250 people, both of which had links to German companies. In a bid to prevent repeats of such workplace disasters, Chancellor Angela Merkel's cabinet agreed on the new rule, which provides for companies with annual revenues of 400 million euros or more to be fined up to 2% of that amount if their contractors abroad are found to breach human rights or environmental rules. Companies could also be excluded from public procurement processes in case of violations. The government agreed at a time when allegations are also ratcheting up over Uyghur forced labor in China. This law protects workers from exploitation across sprawling supply chains and protects human rights across the world, according to Finance Minister Olaf Scholz on Wednesday. He also said in future it will be clear that made in Germany also means respect for human rights. The so-called supply chain law obliges companies to track workers' rights and environmental standards, not just in their own structures, but also at their subcontractors or suppliers at home and abroad. Companies will have to verify possible standard violations in their supply chain and take corrective measures.
Tokyo Olympics organizers approved 12 new female executive board members on Wednesday, less than 2 weeks after appointing a woman president in the wake of an embarrassing sexism row. The appointments increase female representation on the Tokyo 2020 board from 20% to just over 40%, meeting a target set by Seiko Hashimoto when she took over as president last month. Seven-time Olympian Hashimoto replaced 83-year-old Yoshihiro Mori, who resigned after his claims that women talk too much in meetings sparked an outcry in Japan and abroad. Games chiefs agreed to amend their rules to accommodate the new appointments, allowing a maximum of 45 board members, up from just previously 35. There were previously 7 women on the executive board.
UNICEF has installed 168 empty desks outside the UN headquarters in New York. Each represents 1 million children whose schools have been entirely closed for almost a year due to the COVID-19 lockdowns. Take a look.
For me, it is very disturbing, just the sheer scale, and this representing 168 deaths, 168 million children. It's hard to get your kind of head around these kind of numbers, but when you see the sheer number of deaths, it gives you some sense of just how many children have been affected. We've learned from such prolonged school closures has a profound impact, particularly on vulnerable and marginalized children. So we're calling for all governments to open schools now. Schools should be the first to open during the reopening process, to take all actions to do so safely, but to also provide comprehensive support as children re-enter the schools.
This pandemic classroom draws attention to the profound impact of keeping students out of school and calls on world leaders to reopen schools as soon as possible. According to UNICEF, 9 of the 14 countries where schools remained largely closed between March 2020 to February of this year are in the Latin American and the Caribbean region, affecting nearly 100 million school children of the countries. Panama kept schools closed for the most days, followed by El Salvador, Bangladesh, and Bolivia. In addition, around 214 million children, 1 in 7 school children globally, missed more than 3/4 of their in-person learning, while over 888 million continue to face disruptions to their education due to full and partial school closures, according to UN data. Prioritize schools in reopening plans, that is the goal. School closures have devastating consequences for children's learning and well-being. The most vulnerable children and those unable to access remote learning are hit even harder, as they at an increased risk of never returning to the classroom and even being forced into child marriage or child labor, according to UNICEF.
Well, with the rollout of the vaccines, yeah,
hopefully they can all go back to school.
We're all hoping for the normalcy to be back. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.